Okay, good afternoon to everybody. Welcome. This is the first webinar being hosted from the Isle of Man. My name is Colin Peters and I'm the current president of the Isle of Man Committee for the London Institute of Banking and Finance and also banking manager here at Cayman National Bank in the Isle of Man. I'm fortunate to be joined with two guests this afternoon. The first is Mr. Colin Tansley of Intellect Group, and also of the pleasure of having Detective Sergeant John Mitchell with me as well. Both of whom will be talking about cybercrime and banking protocol. And for those who are unfamiliar with the Isle of Man, we are a small crown dependency in the middle of the Irish Sea, self-governing. And we've got a strong financial sector and regulation here in the Isle of Man. And it's great to be able to welcome people from all over the world. It'd be interesting if people could pop in the comments box where you are currently joining us from. We've got people both on Zoom, and we are live streaming to YouTube as well. So we've got people from Pakistan, London, Northampton, South Africa, Liverpool. Wonderful. We've got people from the Isle of Man. Brilliant. Shout out to the Isle of Man. Oh, and Guernsey as well. So we've got people from all over. So very much welcome. We really have got people from all corners of the world. But no, that's great. Thank you very much. Just a sort of a background to us here on the Isle of Man and the committee with the London Institute of Banking and Finance. We are effectively the education side to the Bankers Association. We promote the qualifications to the schools to help them with financial capability and build out their awareness. But also we promote the professional qualifications to the banking sector, and there are some financial services qualifications as well. So we're very keen to hold more of these events. Clearly, in the past, we would have done these face-to-face in a local venue here on the island, but with the advent of the technology and the way it's progressed over the past couple of years, we are able to live stream and do these over Zoom or Teams. So it's great to be able to welcome people from all over the world. So we have a really strong turnout here. We've got over 200 that are attending via Zoom. And also we've got a lot of people looking from YouTube. So what I will do, I'm just going to share my screen and just pop up some slides. I'm just going to go through some, there we go. Housekeeping exercises. All participants' cameras will be off and everybody will be muted. This session is being recorded and will be able to be viewed over the next few days. There is a website there. So if we have a look at www.libf.ac.uk/webinars, you'll be able to pick up this webinar. We are welcome for questions for speakers, so you can type in the chat box. You can type some questions in throughout the presentations, and we'll pick this up at the end of the session. Thankfully, people have been letting me know where in the world we're from. We'll also introduce a number of polls, and I would encourage you to take part in these. We'll have a bit of interaction there. Colin Tansley, who you will see on screen, will be picking up these polls a little bit further. And then there'll be a 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end of the webinar. Now, obviously, in addition to that, if we were holding this in person, we'd talk about the fire exits. Clearly, you're responsible for your own fire exits, so I'll let you worry about those. So without further ado, if I may hand over to Colin Tansley, who is the founder of Intellect Group, an Isle of Man-based investigations, training and technology risk company. He's a career investigator and former senior police officer. He specialises in providing appropriate protection for businesses, and particularly those that operate in offshore jurisdictions. So, Colin, I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to switch on my share screen. Just bear with me a minute. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Colin, for the invitation to speak today, and LIBF, and the beauty of technology that we can reach so far across the world. I was looking at the people coming up from everywhere, all over the world, and we certainly wouldn't be able to do this in a local sort of venue in that regard. And good to see some people from my spiritual home of Yorkshire as well, so that's really good. I'm going to take a look at the cyber side of things from a data breach point of view. Bearing in mind the audience, banking, finance, you are all targets for cyber criminals, but also hold a substantial amount of the data. So I'm going to look at what the threats are and how you can defend yourself and your business, but also you as an individual, because you still remain a target, and criminals will look for the way you're connected to a business, and sometimes that can be through your social life as well. I've got about 20 minutes, so I'm going to sort of dash through this as best I can, but encourage questions at the end. I'm just going to give you my sort of thoughts on this. So antivirus provides coverage against hackers. What I wanted to sort of dispel is this myth that an antivirus package or malware is going to stop them getting in. It's not. It's working on, there's all sorts of ways that hackers will get into your business, and it's really important to understand that cyber security is much more than electronic protection. And hopefully some of the examples I'll give you today will help you with that. Secondly, my IT provider looks after my cyber security. I don't need to worry. The number of times I hear this, I wish I had £1 for every time I heard it, to be honest. We mustn't think that because we outsource our business data to the cloud, that we outsource our responsibilities for it. Numerous times I've seen sort of cloud providers getting hacked, and that's not, there's all sorts of reasons for that. So it's important to select carefully and make sure what you're signing up for. Things like, what sort of protection they've got in place. So remember that you're responsible for your data, even though it's with somebody else. It's like giving away your credit card data to somebody else almost. I would know if my business was hacked. It can actually take months before you discover that, and I think most of you got that. My business has no information of any use to hackers. If you've got customer data, then you are of interest to hackers. Data is what's been referred to as the new oil. It has a value, and you've only got onto the dark web and spend 5 minutes there to find out what it's used for. And finally, I am mistrustful by nature. Well, human beings, believe it or not, are hardwired to trust, and it almost has to be trained out of you. I spent 30 years in the police, and it was sort of trained out of me, and I'm sure my colleague who's waiting in the wings will bear me out on that one. And what happens is cyber criminals and social engineers will exploit that, because we trust people and things, and if people are dressed in a certain way, we trust them. We see emails that appear to be from a trusted source, and we trust it without thinking. So that's part of the problem. So I talked about data breach. What is it? A data breach is the intentional or unintentional release of secure or private confidential information to an untrusted environment. So you can see it goes far beyond cyber, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that shortly, some quite recent ones. So this is very UK related, but I would imagine it travels internationally as well, that the average cost of each record taken in business damage is £115. So it's beyond the physical taking of the piece of data. It can be your reputation, it can be a fine, it can be the reparation, it can be days lost. The average overall cost of a data breach to a company is £211,000. That's an average cost. And it can take up to 279 days to identify a breach, contain it. So they can be sat on your system, stealing data or put a backdoor in, and you would know nothing about it. Sometimes it gets published, and then that is often the flag to organisations that this has happened. So please don't think that you would know straight away. You may not. So almost a third of data breaches in 2020 involve small businesses. So if you're a small business, they will target you because you may not have the same level of protection as a larger business. So you may not have an IT department. You may not have people that are monitoring the outwardly. In big business, they talk about SOCs, Security Operations Center. 60% of small business owners think their businesses aren't a likely target of cyber criminals for those very reasons I've just described. They don't think there's anything of any worth. If you've got customer email addresses, if you've got customer data, you're a target. Always think that way. And the last slide there is really that, remember, criminals have no morals. Charities are under threat as well. So half of businesses and a quarter of charities report having cybersecurity breaches in the last 12 months. And that was a survey from 2020. It's probably gone up given the pandemic. And some figures to sort of back this up. In 2021, 18.8 billion data records have been breached already. Business email compromise is on the rise. That's your business emails gets taken over by a hacker and used in whatever way they see fit. Ransomware is probably one of the biggest threats, and that remains the case, that they will lock down your data and demand a ransom for you, often in Bitcoin, for you to pay. But what we're also seeing a rise in is attacks by text messages. So your parcel has arrived is one of the favored ones at the moment. You click on the link, you're either asked to enter personal data, or you're going to bring something into your system that's nasty and cause the breach. So here's some recent ones. In August, T-Mobile, 40 million current and past customers had their sensitive information breached. So that is a hefty swathe of customer data, I'm sure you'd agree. And they can use that data for all sorts of things: identity theft, breaching accounts, etc. Here's one that sort of struck a chord with me, that when the British Embassy evacuated in Kabul, they left contact details of local employees during the evacuation. That's a data breach. And you can imagine the sorts of implications that has as well for those people that are left on the ground. September, the gun trader website was hacked. Names and addresses of 110,000 UK gun owners have been released on a map. So the hackers have very kindly put this data onto a map. So if somebody was so minded, they can identify individuals and the fact they may hold a Section 1 firearm or a shotgun, and they can burgle their house. And that, as we were talking about this morning with a colleague, that has some massive implications for public safety as well. Criminals like firearms. And again this month, 21.3 gigabyte of data destroyed by a Vengeful employee after being sacked. So took exception to the fact that she'd been fired and decided to destroy corporate data. 1 gig is 65,000 pages of Microsoft Word. So it gives you some indication of just how massive that is for a company if they lose that data. And the problem is that we are dealing with an invisible enemy most of the time. We don't know who these people are. Hopefully we do law enforcement get to find out sometimes, but it can be organized crime, can be nation states. There's what's known as hacking as a service. You can order this on the dark web and instruct a company or a set of individuals to hack a company. The list goes on. So what are you likely to see in a cyber attack? Is this? Not much at all. So you've got to be on your guard all the time. You've got to think defense and think the worst. So I'm going to sort of try and run through what I see as one of the biggest, if we can plug this particular gap, I think we will lower your risk. Phishing emails. So I'm just going to talk about phishing emails from the things to look out for. And I'm coming at this from a crime prevention angle. I'm a firm believer that we can prevent crime. And we've got to understand that law enforcement the world over do not have the resources to respond to every single phishing incident. So we've got to start taking responsibility for ourselves and identify incoming emails that look suspicious. And thankfully, there are some statistics about this. So things to look out for. A sense of urgency. The person who's sending that email wants you to act quickly. They want to engender this sense of panic. So you're going to see words like payment, invoice, manage, confidential. If you see something confidential, most people are quite nosy. They want to see, oh, it's confidential, I'll have a look. So they're indicators. It will often have an attachment, and it will have a requirement to click onto something. And here's an example of one I received. And I've just highlighted some of those indicators on the email itself. So got this attached file. There's actually two, so they're going sort of 2 for 1. Please quote ASP as this is needed, top urgent. And often the language used doesn't quite tie in with your own as well. Now, if we were to look at Roy Kane's email, we see that he's actually from marco.monopoly@howash.com. Well, howash.com provide those jet washers. So it looks to me very much like that the Marco has had his business email compromised. So they're, hackers, cyber criminals are after email addresses that they can then take over and use and try to convince people that this is from a genuine source. So some of the things we can do. Always look at the sender email address. If you're using one of the most popular email providers, which is Outlook, you will have the facility to hover over that. And does the email accord with what the sender, what it's saying in the email address? So take a good look. Don't, out of curiosity, open the attachment to check anything. The attachment may be loaded with malicious software. That could then launch a ransomware attack into your system and you lose access to your data. Always look at things like the spelling and grammar. And does the images if there's images present, do they look right? And if it doesn't look right, don't open it, don't click it. If it's a genuine email, somebody is going to contact you by telephone or get in touch by other means. We've got to stop responding to stuff just because it appears in our mailbox, just to clear the queue, if you like. I'll give you another example of an email address. So this purports to be from the NatWest. And if you look very carefully, this is what's known as an alias. It says postmaster@visualradioarts.co.uk. I'm pretty certain that's not a branch of NatWest. So you can create an alias in most email accounts. So you almost rename it, but you can't hide. You can hide to a point the original email. So just to emphasize, if you're in any doubt at all about any email, don't open it, don't click. And remember, somebody will get in touch by the means if it's that urgent. So how do we stay secure? I just want to talk about some simple things we can all do to keep ourselves and our companies safe and cost very little, really. So the way out of a ransomware attack is to have a backup. So make sure you back up your data. Make sure that if you're on a cloud provider, make sure they are backing up your data on a regular basis. Do check that one, because people have been caught out with that. You can do your own individual backups as well if you're a small business. It's the critical data you want that if you lose access to it, you need to be able to get back on your feet and stand up and be able to function as a business. Please do updates. If your machine or your device tells you that there's an update that needs doing, you may be offline for about 5 minutes while it does its thing. If you're with a Windows machine, probably half an hour, but I use Mac. So, but just do it, because the update is primarily to patch a security flaw. So code is often written, has flaws in it. They realize there's a flaw or a bug, it's fixed. The update is actually fixing that. So the longer you leave it without the update, the more vulnerable you are. So make sure your updates are done. Next, educate. Educate your staff, educate yourself, be aware. Social media is very good if you tap into law enforcement sources. I know that on the Isle of Man, we've got an organisation called Oxia that gives out updates about cybercrime, and in most jurisdictions, you've got something similar. Listen to what they're saying, but also consider courses for your staff. Most e-learning courses don't cost very much at all nowadays. That small investment in your people will make them more alert, and emphasize to them that, if your company goes under, because of a cyber attack, they could lose their jobs. And that's actually quite a good motivator. But it goes beyond that. It's about, don't assume because somebody can use a computer, they understand security. Particularly youngsters have grown up with almost welded to devices. They don't always understand security. Please don't assume they know what they're doing. They might know how to use it functionally. They may not understand the security aspect of it. And the next one, I cannot emphasize this one enough. Two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. It's almost like a double lock into your house that you've got another set of keys. So it's something in your possession. So your email account will flash up. You've got to verify yourself. You go to your phone, you put in a 6-figure code, and then like magic, it says, okay, you're verified as a user of this account. Do that to as many accounts as you possibly can, because hackers, I've not known any where they've got around this. So remember, you're in possession of, I use my phone for this. So whenever I log into my social media accounts, my email, I'm always asked to verify. Yes, it's a few minutes, but to be honest, if you do that, the chances of getting hacked are lessened dramatically. So if you haven't done it, please do it today. If you want to take a look at this website, this is Have I Been Pawned? You can enter in your email address and it will tell you whether it's been breached or not. It's very good. If you find out that you have been breached, don't panic, change password. If you're not using 2FA, and I very much doubt they would have got through that, but do that as well. And I think you can also do telephone numbers on here as well. So if, these sort of phishing attempts we get, or smishing rather. And finally, just to wrap up on this one, risk assess. We offer a risk assessment service, mostly for AML side of the things, but we do a cybersecurity risk assessment. You can do that on the website. We also offer guided risk assessments. We take you through a questionnaire. You get a report with traffic lights and suggestions. We do it like this now, and it works. It works very well. And it highlights sort of areas that you probably weren't even aware about. So I think I've done there. I hope that's been useful. Colin, I'm going to go put myself on mute.
Thank you very much, Colin. That was really interesting. I'm sure everybody will agree as well. It's there's some very key things to take away from there, from security, two-factor authentication, updates, etc. So that's really useful. Thank you very much, Colin. Our next speaker is Detective Sergeant John Mitchell. He's got over 20 years policing experience across a wide spectrum of areas, and joined the Economic Crime Unit, which is formerly the Financial Crime Unit, in 2008. John has attended a number of courses hosted by City of London Police at constable and management level, and we're very fortunate to have him join us today. Now, given our restrictions on the Isle of Man are less than other places, I'm literally just going to slide across in the chair to John.
Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. Thanks to Colin and the LIBF events team for inviting us along. What I want to sort of present to you today, and again, it's something that other sort of law enforcement may be familiar with, or certainly got something similar. But I think it's quite important and sort of quite prevalent at this moment in time to try and use this as a bit of a springboard to get it launched again, particularly over the last 18 months. We've all faced difficulties with COVID and actually getting this message out there. So banking protocol. What is banking protocol? So it's a scheme between the police, banking institutions, trading standards on the Isle of Man. It's aimed is at the earliest opportunity to identify victims who are in the process of being defrauded of funds from their bank accounts by criminals, and to intervene to prevent these crimes from taking place in the first instance. Victims are often, but not always, elderly, vulnerable, and are targeted by the suspects for a range of fraud offences, It involves the perpetrators encouraging the victims to attend the bank, post office, or other financial service providers in person to withdraw cash or transfer funds. Sometimes the perpetrator will be accompanying the victim in order to make that cash withdrawal. Banking protocol was initially started back in the UK. As we see it now, it was started back in the UK. We adopted it in 2018. And the primary objectives, like I say, is to identify individuals tricked into going into banks and withdrawing or transferring funds to pass on to fraudsters. Is to create a standardized method for the prevention of such fraud. And banking protocol is in essence, it's a preventative tool. If we can actually catch offenders, that's a bonus, but the primary focus of the banking protocol is a preventative tool, and working with the banks to achieve that. And it's also to engage with victims, and it's to reduce that susceptibility to fraud. What we found with victims or victims of fraud, they are targeted numerous times. There's actually a thing called a suckers list, which I know the banks are familiar with, and certainly criminals are familiar with, and they pass this list round the various platforms that they use, and it is a list of names or victims that have been victims in the past. And it's actually trying to educate victims not to become future victims and actually put part of their money again. For us, the banking protocol is really important, as it actually stops the fraud from happening in the first place. So for us, how does it work? Say the customer will attend the bank or the building society, or the post office. We are currently in the process of getting the post office on board. We've had initial meetings, and they are willing to sort of take this on, and they do have certain areas and certain training to try and actually identify people in any case. So the customer will attend the bank and look to withdraw cash or transfer cash, or actually take out a loan. And this is part of what we do for the banks, and what the banks also do for themselves is the training that they require to identify these victims coming in. So the customer's assessed, and the transaction they're going to take out is deemed as unusual or out of character by the bank staff, who will ask a series of questions to establish if the customer is actually a potential victim. And also whether the victim or whether the suspect is in the area of the bank or is in close proximity to the victim. This is quite important for a couple of reasons. We've advocated within our control room, for our police staff, and also to the banks, that they are to call, if the banking protocol is initiated and they suspect there is a victim in the bank, they are to call 999. The reason for doing this is it is an emergency number, but we see it as it is a crime in action, and we also don't want to be putting out mixed messages with several phone numbers for the various banks to ring. So they call 999. Our control room will see that call. It goes straight through to the control room, and the bank will say over the call that this is a banking protocol call, and they will give it a level 1 or a level 2. So we'll say banking protocol, and it's a level 1 response or a level 2 response. The level 1 response will be an immediate response by police. We're quite fortunate here on the Isle of Man in that pretty much all our level 1 banking protocol calls, we're in a fortunate position that we can get police to the banks in a very short space of time. So the level 1 is the suspect is believed to be in the vicinity, and we'll be looking to not only prevent a fraud happening, but we will also looking to catch the offender and hopefully get that extra piece of evidence to get them charged and put through the judicial system. In all other cases, this will be a level 2 response, and these will be examples of a victim attending the bank, wanting to withdraw a large amount of money, wanting to transfer a large amount of money, but it'll generally be overseas. So that'll be a level 2 response, and we will try to get a police officer there within 60 minutes. In general, again, over here, we're quite fortunate that we do get police officers to the victims quite quickly. We always dictate a uniform response. The economic crime unit, we generally deal with a lot of these offences for the actual investigation of the offence, and we also support the local police. The reason we send a uniform police officer is for that shock value for the victim. If I turned up in my usual day wear, which is a suit and a tie, I look like a member of the banking team. And as you'll all be aware, a lot of criminals will actually use the fact that they'll tell the victims that the money that they want to withdraw from the bank, it might be an inside job. So the victims often believe that the bank are involved, and that's why they're withdrawing their money. So for me to tell a victim that you are being scammed, particularly if they don't believe the bank in the first place, a uniformed police officer turning up will give that shock impact and actually try and make victims understand that they are actually being scammed. So that is a reason why we actually send uniformed police officers. Sometimes the police staff continue with the investigation and the victim support. Other times, depending on the size of the job, we will take it on. So for our officers, they will attend the scene and they will conduct an initial investigation, and that's they'll raise a crime report, they'll get all the usual details, they'll obtain as much information from the victim as possible. Again, if the suspect's on scene, they will make every effort to arrest that suspect. But as I've said at the very start, the important thing about the banking protocol is prevention. So police officers will provide sort of strong preventative advice to that victim, and also give them continuing support as well, because what we don't want them to do is to walk out the bank having seen police officers and we have no further contact with them. So we do look to continue that support, again, to prevent them from being repeat victims. I think was mentioned on the previous input, we have Oxia over here, which is the Office of Cybersecurity and Information Assurance. We're encouraging all our local victims to report to Oxia. It's a local government initiative to support local people on the Isle of Man, but we also engage fully with action fraud as well. A lot of the banks advertise action fraud, and a lot of victims still will Google crime prevention, they will Google fraud. The first thing that comes up will be action fraud. So they can still report through action fraud, and Oxia does provide, so anybody reports to Oxia, that report will also make its way to action fraud, and this is to help the Isle of Man on the bigger picture, and also it will assist UK law enforcement to look at the larger organised crime groups. So we are not only supporting the Isle of Man, we're supporting the wider law enforcement. So the online reporting tool for Oxia it's attached to this slide, and we can make that available. And action fraud, again, but very simply, it's a Google search. Action fraud comes, it's the first hit you'll get. And I think certainly for action fraud, although we're encouraging people to report through action fraud, I've noted that certainly I saw Guernsey potentially on this webinar. The Isle of Man, would have been a small jurisdiction, everybody knows everyone else, and it may be the same for the other smaller islands. Some victims are embarrassed when they've actually been defrauded, and they are too embarrassed to go to local law enforcement or even discuss it with family members, because they've either lost money and they don't want to be seen as being caught out by scammers. So potentially, we have had victims that have gone straight to action fraud without contacting anybody on the Isle of Man. And the good thing about action fraud is we do work closely with them. They do report back to us, so we can still engage with that victim. Part of the advice we give out in the victim care is, so it's the action fraud website, it'll be the Oxia website. You've got Take 5, and also Get Safe Online. So we actively push these websites. Just to finish off, we've got some examples and some a couple of Isle of Man stats as well. So customer visited the bank and requested to send money to America. Again, I think this is probably part of the romance scam. She met somebody through Facebook. The female had been sending photos to the victim, and the offender had been making promises to come to the Isle of Man, and has also requested multiple payments to multiple bank accounts. So this has been noticed by the banks. The banks have picked this up and prevented a loss of £4,500. We've had another victim, was talking to multiple people online. He's trusted them over a period of time. Against the offenders are very good at gaining the trust of these victims, and they come up with, as we know, various stories to convince victims of the offender's woes. So over a period of months, he was convinced to send £24,000 to various bank accounts. He's then gone into the bank, he's run out of money. He's actually tried to get a £5,000 loan again to send money. The banks have identified this and prevented that from happening. Repeat victim of romance fraud, previously defrauded of £96,000, stated she requested to open a new account with overdraft and credit card. And she's again met somebody online. Again, it's another example of the banking protocol preventing this. Prior to us taking on the banking protocol, and had we have had this in place, I personally dealt with an elderly lady, 90 years old, very switched on for her age, and an intelligent person, previously a school teacher. She was defrauded out of £800,000, and it was a direct result of a quite sophisticated fraud, but not uncommon. She's gone into the bank and been convinced to transfer all her money out of the jurisdiction of the Isle of Man to various bank accounts in the United Kingdom. Had the banking protocol been in place and the training been in place, and certainly from the input from ourselves and from the banking staff, that could have been prevented. So a reason why we've actually sort of taken this on. Again, finish off a couple of stats. Bearing in mind we've had sort of an 18-month, nearly 2-year sort of COVID interruption. 2019, we've got sort of most stats from 28 banking protocol referrals, investment and romance scams were the most common referrals. Approximately £330,000 suspected fraud losses have been prevented. Average age of the victims is 68, youngest 19, and eldest 87. Of the 28 referrals, 20 have been male and 8 female. UK-wide figures, and we've sort of tried to get the sort of latest ones we can, certainly for this input. Since its inception, since in October 2016, more than 142 million. That's obviously up to March of 2021 of losses have been prevented, and savings of 45 million in 2020 alone. There's been over 10,000 emergency calls and more than 500 arrests as a result of the banking protocol. Like I say, this ideal opportunity for us, this input, we want to sort of springboard certainly the banking protocol again, so we can start talking again to the banks within the Isle of Man and actually pushing that training out. So yeah, that's about it for us. I'll hand you back to Colin. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. Any questions, then please put them our way.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, I mean that's been extremely insightful, very useful indeed. I hope everybody's clearly enjoyed presentations from both Colin and John. I think what we'll do now, we will open up for questions. So we have got a chat box. If anyone is interested in asking any questions of our guests, and we'll leave that open for a short while. If people have got, I'll pass over to the speakers. Yeah, I mean, that's been really good. Thank you. We'll just keep that open for a moment. Thank you, Nathan. That was interesting. From what I'm seeing some, not necessarily some questions, but people have certainly found it engaging and very interesting. And, we've all got, we can all help each other well, from those working in the banking industry, but also being very well aware of any of the threats that Colin has highlighted. Simon's asked, and this would be one I'd direct to you, John. Can you give me an idea of a conviction rate for fraud? I'm just going to turn my screen round so we can see John. Conviction rate.
Yeah, so is that conviction rate on the Isle of Man? Fraud, the actual fraud offence, or the offence of fraud, is relatively new on the Isle of Man, but we do have money laundering offences. So generally, if we arrest somebody for money laundering and fraud, we generally have quite a good conviction rate on the island, and they do carry quite heavy prison sentences. Certainly on the Isle of Man, the courts are quite keen to prevent the offending through sort of through sentencing, high sentences. But the actual sort of it's difficult to give the actual sort of figures really on sort of percentage wise. But from banking protocol, we certainly for the Isle of Man, a lot of our offenders are off island and outside our jurisdiction, because for the very nature of it, of the Isle of Man, and the money that they're after is usually on romance frauds, those type of frauds, and the money is sent overseas, so it bypasses even the UK and goes sort of further afield. So for us to actually convict people off island is quite difficult, considering some, that if people are sending £4,000 and £5,000 or £6,000 at a time, it's difficult to go to get that. If we had somebody on the Isle of Man in the vicinity of the bank that was arrested as part of a fraud, we would generally get a conviction on that.
Okay. Thank you, John. I'll just have a look at some of the other questions. A lot of questions coming through, actually.
I think Mohit is 1346 is the first one. I think the next one after the conviction fraud, Colin.
Yeah, I'm just okay. I think there's a few comments about ways of is it possible to get 100% protection from first viruses, and is it possible to get 100% protection from viruses and also 100% protection against hackers? I don't know whether you can add anything to that one, Colin.
In a word, no, because there's no 100% solution. But what you can do is, and I always use the crime prevention sort of take on this, that if a criminal has got two houses and one has got a burglar alarm, got very strong windows and good locks, and another one hasn't, they're always going to go for the easy target. So if you implement some of the solutions I've mentioned today, the chances you're going to lower your risk. So the thing is with viruses, they're being made all the time. So there's new ones coming out all the time, new methodology. And hackers, the data's sort of strewn all over the place, and the supply chain is always worth looking at, that you may be secure, but your supply chain may not be. So they can get in that way, so that nobody is ever able to offer you 100% yet. I don't think we'll ever be able to get to that. Criminals are very... their ingenuity never sort of ceases to astound me, but And bear in mind, it's not just electronic. There are other ways. You know, there are people that are trying to get in your business purporting to be a local engineer or an air conditioning mechanic or something like that, and we'll try and steal data. So I think it's about being alert. I can't emphasize enough about 2FA. That will give you very, very good protection.
Colin, just a question that's come up, and I'm going to direct this to John. Assad's asked a question: why can't anything be done with fraudsters that are based overseas in countries that have no regulation stroke enforcement standards, and will it be looked at? I think that's a very useful question, and John to my right is keen to add a bit of insight into that one.
Yeah, so just picking up the question from Assad to everyone, why can nothing be done with fraudsters that are based overseas in countries that have no regulations or enforcement standards? Will this be looked at? There are international bodies that look at money laundering standards across the world. Certainly from our experience, for the Isle of Man to obtain evidence from other countries, there is an international letter of request regime. It's a treaty signed by a number of countries, or a high number of countries, that all agree to this standard of the international letter of request, where we would ask other jurisdictions to obtain evidence on our behalf, because obviously all countries will have different laws, different standards of laws, different acts, different sections within these laws. So I think to try and best answer the question, we can get evidence from a lot of countries. Countries that have no regulations or enforcement standards, again, it's in the question. It's very difficult to get that evidence because of the very fact they have limited regulations and no enforcement standards. And also the funds as well. Once funds leave the jurisdiction of the Isle of Man, they can very quickly go around the world. So everyone knows at a click of a button, £5,000 can leave the Isle of Man, can go to a bank in the UK. It can then go to a bank in Europe, and they can go to America, and it can go around the world very quickly. The regime of the international letter request and the way law enforcement works, it takes time. So we are playing catch up all the time, and it is a huge problem. And obviously, looking at the question, it is continually being looked at, but the solutions are very difficult to come by. But I do know that, so certainly the legitimate and the countries that do take money laundering seriously do take part in the international letter request regime.
Thank you very much, John. Looking at other questions, that's an interesting one because Colin, you were picking up on passwords and two-factor authentication and being secure. The question from Zali, or Zali, apologies, is it safe to use password managers as standalone within antivirus tools and browser save password options?
I've used a password manager for years and never had a problem, but bear in mind, I'm not working in a corporate environment, I'm working at home. So I've got control over my browsers. So yes, it would be my answer. Some companies don't like you to use password manager. I think they're perfectly safe, providing you've sort of checked. There are some very good ones, and I probably shouldn't recommend them on a call like this, but what I would say is, with a password manager, only use the ones that you can, that have got very good reviews, and also make sure they deploy 2FA. So a password manager would encrypt your passwords in the cloud. You log in with, generally speaking, with one long and strong password, so you don't have to remember any other passwords. So you then, what it also does is it auto-fills your logins, so it works really well. Browsers, I wouldn't use a browser safe password option, because if somebody gets into your browser, they can get into your accounts. So the password manager is actually standalone in a sense, and it shouldn't affect your antivirus tools, but in certain corporate networks, they will outlaw the use of those sorts of things. So as a small business, if you've got control of the network, it's okay to use them. And I think a password manager it actually ticks a lot of boxes for me, in that it generates strong passwords. You haven't got to remember, you haven't got that human fallibility that you've got to remember all these different passwords. It does it for you. And all you've got to do is remember one long, strong password. We can all do that.
Colin, I think I'm just going to do this as the last one before I wrap up. Adeline has asked a question about how effective is the public awareness program against hacking. I mean, I'd certainly add that events such as what we're doing today, engaging, using the banking protocol that John's spoken about, the information you've got, you highlighted on your website as well. All we can do is get that message out to everybody to be very careful and watch out for any strange emails that come through, and use services such as yours, Colin, and other software providers, and also just keep up to speed. Can you add anything there, Colin?
All I would say is that there is a lot of really good public awareness programs, but I think we've always got to think it's going to happen to me. What I see all the time is people, it won't happen to me because I'm not of any interest to a hacker. They are after anything and everything. If they think anybody on this call, what would be the effect of somebody taking over your identity? What could they do with that? If you think in that regard, it's going to make you think a little bit different. It's about thinking defensively, and it's causing for a shift. We use these things, these phones and devices, without thought for what they are. The little tracking devices, they're full of data. We've really got to think differently. If anybody wants to ask me any questions that we've not been able to get to, Colin, then they can feel free to contact me through the website, which is intellect-group.com, and I'm more than happy to sort of address the question, because I know there's quite a few I'd like to answer, but we're not going to get to them because of time.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I think what I'll do, I'll just in closing, I'd like to extend my thanks to Colin and also Detective Sergeant John, who's sat to my right still, and just highlight locally on the island, we are looking to hold a panel event again this year, and further details of that will be sent out. It'd be great to have an event in person, but we'll follow through on that. If there's any other questions or any other information we can provide, either via the recording, which will be available, or through the LIBF website, and LinkedIn as well. I know, Colin, you promote an awful lot of stuff on LinkedIn. There's also a lot of stuff that comes through from the LIBF, both through social media. So if we need to put anything out there, we send that. But thank you very much for everybody who's attended. We've had people from Hong Kong, Finland, Bangladesh, the US and Malaysia. So we've really gone global today, Colin and John. So thank you very much indeed. And I'll call an end to it now. Thank you.